I guess I want to ask this because I'm really curious.
Yeah.
Because a lot more people are talking about health now.
Yeah.
Not enough people are talking about it. But the reason I guess it's been in the mix is because of the after effects that have happened with lockdowns, particularly with those with kids. And you
Yeah.
see, in this case, your husband being a clinical psychologist. Uh, uh, how has that um, what has been the ramifications of what he's seen? Has would you consider him being a lot busier lately because of what's transpired over the past 2 years?
I think so. Yeah. I especially when the lockdown first started, he had in April of 2020 when so many people were losing business, he had the busiest record month he'd ever had in his practice, and everybody had gone online, and nobody had conflicts in their schedule, but everybody wanted that connection time. So they, it was a priority that they would meet with him because everybody was stuck at home, and there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. A lot of people really struggled from that, and coming out of that, it's just stayed busy. A lot of times there's kind of the ups and downs depending on seasons, especially around here where seasonal depression is really high with our long winters, but it it hasn't slowed down at all since then. He's stayed very busy.
Yeah, I bet. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, because when people think of Wyoming, they just think grand open spaces.
Yeah.
And over here, being in the West Coast, people are more in touch with their feelings, if you will. Where any little thing like, "Oh my gosh, I was murdered today," it's like, what? It's like the
Mm,
you don't think about a place that has a lot more free space to roam, that people might be as negatively impacted as, say, as someone that's confined to an apartment and can't even walk down the hall. But
yeah.
the effects, I think that people that don't consider even what's transpired in what are considered the flyover states, if you will,
Hmm.
um, it has been either a shared experiences or in some cases even worse because of what um, the the supply chain, how it's affected them and their way of life
Yeah.
versus a place that's always been expensive, which is the big cities on the west and the east coast. And there's always something to be able to get. And I'm like, all right, fine, I can't go, I can't go get my food, so I'm just gonna DoorDash it. I do not think that that was something that is in a town of 2,500 people that was easily as accessible as it was here.
Well, I live in a little bit bigger town in Casper where we are. There's more closer to 50 or 70,000 depending on how you look at it. So they did have some of those options. And I will say, being in Wyoming, we had a lot more options for we can we can just go out of town and there's nobody there. And we could still leave
Yeah.
our houses and get to places where we were just alone. And, if we're trying to social distance, we could still do that pretty, pretty well, just because that's the kind of the saying that came out when social distancing became a thing was that
Mhm.
Wyoming's been social distancing since 1890 when we became a state. Because we really do that naturally. So that part of it was for sure. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
But also, oh, my dog. Um,
Sorry.
the the winters being long though, also on top of like we're stuck at home and winter is 9 months of the year here. Like it snowed last week still. Um, that I mean, we all had our adjustments that we had to make, whether it
Yeah.
was you were in an apartment and you couldn't leave to go in the hallway, or we're stuck where we can't get out of the cold weather when maybe people would have traveled otherwise around that
Mhm.
time of year or something. So
Yeah, because there are parts of Wyoming, especially when I think of Wyoming, it's where can I say that Warland is your hometown?
yeah.
Okay. All right. So like when I think of places like around there, whenever I went to Warland, from there it'd always be like a jumping off point for me to either get to Yellowstone, but I
Mhm.
gotta go through Cody. And when I think about those places, I think of them as heavily reliant on tourism,
Yeah.
and that was all gone. And I
Yeah.
cannot imagine what that must have done to the local economy there to not receive anything at all. And when I guess the government was sending out funds to help people cover uh, whatever expenses they had. I, as a small business owner, can attest to how difficult it was for even us to get a PPP loan, because
Mhm.
companies that didn't need them, particularly in the East Coast, because they were 3 hours ahead of us, they were all getting it,
Mm.
versus us. Like, as much as I love and respect him, Tom Brady, do you have the money to run your operation for years to come without a penny from anywhere else? But TB12 Sports ended up getting PPP. Like,
Mm.
meanwhile, the little companies were out holding the bag. And then the so-called summer of love happened, and then things got even worse. So there has been a lot of issues, not just due to the lockdowns, but some of the after effects that transpire with it. Like, what I consider people raging out
Mm.
because of things that have transpired, and it was just ripe for the happening. I think it was March, mid March, as we were heading into the lockdown here in California, where I declared, it's like, I'm hoping we don't see riots akin to the Los Angeles riots now, specifically citing a racial riot because
Yeah.
of where I saw our country was going, and
Yeah.
not even 2 months later it happened. So it's to see all that's transpired. So before that, people stuck at home, and then when they ran out of things to do, they just kept shoveling food into their mouths. And if they're in an apartment, they can't do anything. They feel.
Yeah.
And then came the time where, like, all right, we're getting out of COVID. Yeah, but now you don't fit through the doorway. And then there were and then there were others that were dealing with the psychological effects, because this
Mm.
is social engineering by social media that makes
Mhm.
you either feel awful about yourself or envy others for their lifestyle. So you have that discouragement because you'll never measure up. So you had physical and mental effects that were happening, not to mention kids that
Mhm.
weren't able to have a proper, I guess, what you say, normal childhood, to be confined to a space,
Yeah.
and that did hurt a lot of people, that I knew. And I guess, and to ask you, um how, even though it was Wyoming, I think Rhode Island has a larger population than Wyoming itself, even though territorial wise, I think Wyoming is the fourth largest state in landmass
Yeah.
in the continental United States, at least. Like,
Mhm.
but even then, like you said, there were people struggling. Was it a similar experience that you would say, that people still have, like, health issues despite the fact of the great outdoors?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I mean, we all have people that we know who COVID took from us, or the different diseases. And we still, my boys had to finish out the school year here. And like, when my older son was in first grade, when he had to come home, so he didn't get to finish first grade, and then went like right into second grade. And I still see how that was hard on kids, just to like be pulled out of school, and they lost all the social side, but also a lot of the education that just can't happen when you're not set up for that, just out of the blue. And I think we're still coming out of it. And I think parts of education is better because of it, because now they are equipped to do it from home if they need to. And previously there was no option for that. So in that
That's true.
way, it's improved, because when we've had to be quarantined this year for whatever different exposures, my kids still got to have school, and they when
Mm.
it started, but they didn't. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's helpful.
Alrighty, so I switched my headphones out. For those wondering, how did I switch my headphones? Uh, just to avoid some technical issues. So, one thing that you touched on, I don't think I've mentioned this before on my program, actually, that my kids only missed in-person learning about a month, no more than
Mm.
that.
Wow.
They did go back, a small Christian private school.
Yeah.
They were able to social distance, and maintain, like, just follow the safety protocols, and offer, I guess, at home learning too at the time. So they were able to adjust on the fly, which was pretty awesome. And
Mm.
on top of that, uh, I think uh, what really helped was that, since, like, I expected what was going to happen, that this was not going to leave us. It's just going to be a part of our everyday life. To get down to zero COVID is just ridiculous.
Yep.
Even China's extreme cases on trying to get to zero, their zero COVID policy is absolutely insane. So it's just another example of you're not going to achieve it, so you got to learn to live with it.
Yep.
So in my case, that's what I assumed, and that's why I told my wife we will prevail over this. We're not going to let this control us. We will take the precautions that are necessary, and care for those around us. Our kids will go to school.
Yeah.
So that's the long and short of that. And yeah, they didn't miss almost any school, and it was, I guess you
Great.
could say, due to other parents being inspired by us, that eventually when fall came around and schools opened up, that at first it was like ghost town. There were no kids
Mhm.
coming back, but we were persistent. We kept coming, and the school's buzzing and it's growing and it's bigger. And that's what I wanted to see. Like, honey, we need to trailblaze. This needs to. We cannot let this thing defeat us, because if anyone studies any history and will know, it's like this thing it's here to stay.
Mhm.
So so yeah, that's been one thing. So uh, I know that that's where it's been hard on kids, but when it's also been hard on parents, especially if they got to juggle a lot of things as you and your husband do. It's like, okay, now I got to be teacher, and being teacher, it's like now there's less time. If there were like me time, if you will, there
Mhm.
was less of it to none of it. So
Yeah.
then the burnout that people felt was that, okay, I'm exhausted physically,
Mhm.
mentally, maybe emotionally, because the kids, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. The kids, you can take them over. They're not going to do their homework. They're not going to eat. They're not going to drink. They're not going to sleep when you tell them to. So it,
Yeah.
it gets exhausting, right?
Yep.
And so then when it comes to being able to take care of someone's health, well, they don't. So when it's like, when they know they have to, when their body tells them like, hey, it's time to do something for your well-being, it's like, I don't have the time.
Yeah.
Well, that's because people forget that nutrition is almost all of it. So like
Yeah.
any training program is 80% nutrition, 20% exercise. And
Yep.
if they slip up, or in my case get injured, and it's hard to, if you're in a bulking phase, for example, it's really hard to switch everything to go into a cutting phase, because your body was conditioned. But it's to know the discipline, know the principles, and get back in it.